he remembered hearing a very loud noise, and that the windows and the whole house started to tremble when hearing this big crash or big noise. Not only he wasn't sure what it was, but the really interesting thing about him was that he always kept a notebook and started to log down all the different strange anomalous events of sightings that were occurring in that area. So he showed us his notebook. I thought that was quite fascinating.
How many sightings were? I mean, how many objects did he see? Was it?
There were at least. He had a number of them first, and then as he started recording them, I came across 3 or 4 different events that he was starting to write down.
Wow.
I would love to get a copy of his notebook.
Yeah, really.
We took pictures of that.
It really kind of proves that this is definitely a hotspot. Now, going back to the crash, was it ever definitively proven if there were or were not bodies found in and around the wreckage at all?
Well, this is what's really interesting on that. Although the report states that there were no bodies, we came across. I'm sorry. There was a report that was given to us, and now I'm losing my memory here, John.
No, that's okay. I mean, it didn't...
Yeah, by Robert Dean. And he had shared with us when he was out there in Mexico, he was at a conference, and that this police officer Mexican police officer had approached him and gave him this black and white photograph. And of that, it showed an alien being that had been captured by the Mexican Federal Police at a specific UFO crash. And now, this police officer was with the Mexican military, and then later he had showed that picture. Now, going back to that event, there was something else that happened too, and this is where I start tying in other events. Now, I mentioned that this small airplane was hit by this small disc. Well, there was another major event that happened in Mexico to a gentleman who was also flying. This was 8 months later, and I had a chance to interview him, and I was really fascinated by his case. But approximately 8 months later, he was flying. His name is Carlos de los Santos, and he was flying this small airplane back to across from Mexico City to the state of Guerrero, where he was going to drop off some people that he was working for a company. And on his return, basically, he had this feeling that he was being watched. And when he turned over along outside the window on his left wing, he saw what would look like a small, dark gray colored object, almost a rat gray oval shape. And he described it as being approximately around 4 or 5 meters, which is close to about 12 to 15 feet, maybe more than that, in diameter. And there was another object on the other side of his airplane that he saw, and then all of a sudden he saw the third object coming right toward his canopy, and then it went underneath the fuselage and hit him. And so he had 3 objects, and he had no control of his airplane, and he's screaming, "Mayday, Mayday, Mayday." And he's calling the air traffic controllers that he's observing 3 UFOs. He has no control of his airplane. And now I've got the actual transmission of him yelling, "Mayday, Mayday, Mayday."
Wow.
And I've got this I got this copy from when I was in Mexico. And of course we sat and interviewed him, and he said he was totally terrified. His airplane was flying around an altitude of 10,000 feet. The object started to lift his airplane up to approximately around 14,000 feet, and his biggest concern was that he was going to run out of oxygen because his airplane wasn't pressurized. So for approximately 18 minutes, they held him, and then all of a sudden they just took off. He got control of his airplane. But as he was looking at them, they were flying toward the direction of the Mount Popocatépetl, which is the large volcano, which covers the vicinity of Mexico City, about 40 miles out in the city limits. And they were flying toward that direction. So he was able to get his airplane back under control. And, of course, he reveals this extraordinary story to the public. It came out on national media. He had people like J. Allen Hynek and several other noted researchers from the United States that actually came down and interviewed him.
I was going to ask if there was
questions.
If there was damage to his aircraft.
Yes, there was. Actually, he wasn't able to land his airplane because one of his landing wheels wasn't able to come down. So he had to manually crank it down.
Wow.
And then here's the thing. They found like a major dent underneath the fuselage, which definitely demonstrates that there was some sort of collision. And it's an extraordinary story. But we had to put that in our book because it really ties in, again, going back to the Koyama case, that here you had a collision with a small disc. And then you have an event 8 months later by a Mexican pilot, and it was nationally covered throughout the world, and in terms of the media covering it, and then all the attention that it received. So we think there's definitely a tie-in there.
Let me ask you what convinces you, either now or in the beginning or both, that the Koyama, and I hope I have that pronounced correctly, but the Koyama crash really did occur. Is there some kind of shred of evidence that kind of proved beyond a doubt for you?
Well, I would say that as we're going into the research further, finding those pits, finding those locations out there, tying in the rest of the other cases, and here this would be ideally, John, if we could, and this is where we need more. Is getting more documentation, obviously.
Do you think the military, the U.S. military, is a target for that, the Mexico military, or both?
I'd say both, and this is where it gets really interesting, is that one of my friends, actually he's the president of AMIFO, is going to petition that Mexico releases further its reports to the public, basically through the Freedom of Information Act. The other issue is we're hoping that the families, if these soldiers had died and the ones that had perished in this incident, maybe we might be able to get some testimony from families. Of course, there's always that chance that it's covered up, because what happens here is that there could be other incidents, other accidents, and they could always say, well, your loved one had perished in this one particular accident, without really giving any further detail as to where, when, and what. So that's the direction we need to go, John. And it's not 100%, but as you know, when you start getting into this research and start tying in further, hopefully we will come across we may have more of as they call it, a smoking gun. Right.
Well, it's one thing to cover up a photograph or a video or something to that effect, but when you have dead military personnel in the field, let me ask you: was there ever any official explanation for the deaths?
No. Again, this was all was on the retrieval efforts in the Deneb report. So, and wow. That's what we're working with.
Well, you recently appeared with Bill Burns on the UFO Hunters show or series for the History Channel. I wanted to bring that up because I believe that is replaying tomorrow. That's not the premiere of that episode. That's already aired, correct?
Right. It aired on Wednesday, and it's coming out again tomorrow night.
Great. So I wanted to bring you on because I definitely wanted to talk about that, let everybody know on the Black Vault and anybody who's listening to BVR. And you can see Ruben on UFO Hunters tomorrow night on the History Channel. Check your local listings for the exact time. But Ruben, I wanted to ask you about your experience. What happened during that investigation? Did you find anything new? Was it kind of just a recap of your first trip out there, or?
Well, it was a combination of one is John, whenever these expeditions they come out of our expenses, basically. Mm-hmm. And going with the UFO Hunters, they were very much interested in our case, and this was a great opportunity for both Noe and I to go back and to do the research. And although we were under a limited amount of time, but I went basically part as an interpreter and a researcher for them and establishing the contacts, because there were two other cases that